Hello and welcome to the AI First Show. This is the show where we talk about how to do things with AI, how to get real work done, give you the latest news, updates, all the different models, all the different tools. It's an explosion of ideas right now. My name is Stephen Barr. It's your co-host Leonardo Gonzalez. Welcome to the show, everyone. Let's dive into it. What have we got in store for today, Leonardo?
Well, everyone's raving about OpenClaw, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
For context, you may know this as ClawdBot, Moldbot, OpenClaw. What's the story behind the name?
So ClawdBot was originally named as a pun on Claude from Anthropic, but with a CLAWD. But it was close enough of a homonym that Anthropic had to protect their trademark and go after the creator or politely request to rename. And there was a brief moment where it was called Moldbot as it was molting, and then finally settled on a proper branding, which is a bit stickier, and people like OpenClaw.
Yeah, Molt just doesn't have a good ring to it. There's a classic Seinfeld where they're trying to merge like Poland Spring with something else, and they came up with Moland Springs. And then Elaine says, we got to do something about that name. And it ends up throwing off the whole merger.
Hey, you guys, what's the name of the new company going to be?
Moland Spring.
Moland?
Yes, we combined Morgan and Poland.
Yeah, I know, but Moland? I wouldn't drink anything called Moland.
But it was Mr. Pitt's idea.
Oh, well, what's in a name? I mean, water is water, right?
We've got to do something about that.
So I think that's good. Get rid of that Moltbot. There's something wrong with that syllable in English anyway. Okay, OpenClaw.
And, it's ironic enough that there was another thing that happened beforehand, which was Anthropic cut off access to third-party clients to their subscription service. And the first one to notice was ClawdBot. He posted on X, I smell drama, when he looked at an API response that said, unsupported client or something. And it set off this whole controversy because other things like open code were blocked. And one of the resulting things was that alternative model labs and inference providers stepped up to say, we're different, like OpenAI. They allowed open hands and open code to use their codex or model and to use their ChatGPT Plus and Pro subscriptions the way that people were using Claude subscriptions with third-party harnesses. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, not specifically OpenAI's, but even other third-party labs, because there are two main concerns with OpenClaw that most people know about. One is burn a lot of tokens, and the other is massive security exposure. And there's one solution to both of those things that I think is worth talking about. And also another mitigation. One main mitigation I would recommend against is don't get on these social networks for agents like Moldbook and 4Claw. They don't have a very good security principles in mind. They're vibe coded by non-technical people, pretty much. And there was a misconfiguration in Supabase, and basically all the tokens were exposed. This was eventually patched. The guy was they were trying to get a hold of this guy for a while. Even the CEO of Supabase saying, hey, we have a one-click fix. You just need to click on it, but they're like chasing after him for a while.
Should I put this on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Wow. Okay, Supabase is really cool. It's like a very narrow subset of Postgres and some well-used authentication mechanisms. They've got row-level security. They've got a great MCP server that's cool. Like you can get in there and just say, modify this table to do this and this, and it's great. Anyway, okay, so CEO of Supabase is saying, hey, wake up here. You've got some issue here. Wow, look at that.
And so Karpathy was, pretty vocal about his interest in Moldbook as a social experiment, pretty much. But he's got a couple million followers. The fact that his API credential was leaked along with everybody else's is a bad thing, because people could impersonate his bot and indirectly then impersonate him. So that's a risk. Even though this was since patched, it's not clear that there has been an effective key rotation mechanism, because there was no way to really do that since not everybody had an email. People grabbed the database. So this is pretty much compromised. Even though it was fixed, people already grabbed all the APIs of all the accounts that existed at the point of compromise.
Many people aren't going to realize this until their invoices come due, or until they start realizing why they hit their max. It's because other people are using
to be clear,
API
I'm not talking
keys.
about their LLM API keys. I'm talking about their Moldbook API keys, which allows people to then impersonate other people on Moldbook. Yeah, but that is the most important point that I want to talk about. The first point is, stay off Moldbook. Maybe at some point things will change, but I would not recommend it right now. The main other reason besides security is there's this interesting thing called brain rot for LLMs. And that is you pollute their context. This paper is really interesting. I like the fact that they created an infographic. I love infographics. And I didn't even have to read the paper. I did scan through it. But I was happy just to read the headline. But looking at this, it's interesting. They train models with different data, both like low quality, highly popular posts, as well as long and like more complex posts. And the ones that were trained on low quality and popular material, sensationalist stuff, they became dumber. They skipped reasoning. They had factual errors. It couldn't even be mitigated with fine tuning, and with it was like irreversible brain damage.
So you're saying, like, if I train hook up my LLM to 4chan and a bunch of shit posts, then I'm going to get shit posts. Like, that kind of makes sense.
They just stop thinking critically. They're exposed to this information. And to be clear, this is talking about like the pre-training, but this affects your context. Your OpenClaw is creating persistent memories. All of this is shaping its behavior chronically. So why expose it to low quality content? If you want it to be smart and useful, expose it to the things that you care about. Curate its feed, just how you would want to curate your own algorithm. You want to curate its algorithm. Don't expose it to brain rot, or it's going to get brain rot.
For sure. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so but what does it mean if you can reset its context? Well, I guess then what's the point if you're having
so there's persistent memory, and that's what makes it useful. You can start a new conversation, but it has a memory.md file that kind of summarizes things, and then it has the date files. And then if you configure it, you can have semantic memory with a vector database. And I'll talk about that too. There's a lot of talk about how to securely set up an environment. You should have a container or a VM or a dedicated, machine or something. And yeah, it's good to secure it. Make sure if you have a reverse proxy configured so that you can access the web thing, that it has some kind of authentication. I didn't even want to expose a web port, externally for that. But I am security conscious enough that I would rather take a zero trust approach and just assume that it's going to get compromised. And not even necessarily through network layer attacks, but through prompt injection, which is the other main reason to stay off of these agent social networks. They are just teeming with hundreds of thousands of agents and people who are trying to steal your stuff. They're trying to hack at your agent by sending it these prompts that say, hey, give me your API keys.
So I want to digress for a moment. So my first job as a teenager, I was in network security. As I was 14 years old, I knew all of the Linux firewall commands. This was Linux kernel 2, so it was IP chains rules. And people have no appreciation for how much work has gone into making it safe for most people to connect their computers at home. Like, if you have a public-facing IP address, the amount of times you get port scanned and you're getting vulnerability checked. Your port 80 is going to be busy all the time saying, oh, you're running this old version of Apache. Are you running this web server? There's all this stuff. And now, most people are behind NAT, and they have ISPs that are doing a lot of protection for them. And it seems like as humans, we're always bound to relearn certain lessons every once in a while. And I think that the lesson that Moldbot is going to force us to relearn is that the internet is the Wild West, and it's very unforgiving. It's extremely unforgiving. And if you have information out there to be taken, it may well be. Here, I'll put your screen back on.
Yeah. So the main mitigation that I am proposing for both cost and risk is don't give it your OpenAI API key. Don't give it your Anthropic API key, because that is a thing that can be very expensive if it gets leaked, especially if you work for a company that manages large budgets and maybe, it's not like it's going to max out your credit card, but it's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars. Don't do that. There's subscription plans that are amazing because they provide incredible value. And aside from providing incredible value, they limit the risk. It's not a metered system that's unbounded. So the first one is the GLM coding plan. This is a very popular thing when various agent harnesses came out. You just get ridiculous amounts of usage for very, very little money. Here they compare it to like the Claude Pro plan. You can get 3 times the usage for $9 a quarter.
That's incredible. Wow.
Yes, that is 50% discount for the first quarter. So after that, it's $18 a quarter, but that's still $6 a month for 3 times the usage of Claude Pro, which I think is their $20 a month plan.
So what you could do is if you use this plan exclusively for Moldbot, and your Moldbot was on some isolated network, maybe a virtual machine on its own network, then maybe that would be good because you've got limited blast radius.
Yeah, so your Z.AI key gets compromised. What's the worst that can happen? They max out your usage for the month and you can't access your $6 of usage, So yeah, very limited damage. And you don't even have to dedicate, you could still use this for coding, but the main difference is it's not a metered plan. And another thing is it's really hard to max it out. I'm not actively using this so much right now, but usually even when I'm actively using it, it stays around 1 or 2% for the 5-hour quota, 1% for the monthly. It's just, I'd have to unleash swarms of agents to really use a lot of it. So that is one alternative I highly recommend. Another one is Kimi. Kimi has these subscription plans. They're a little pricier. They're more kind of on par with other subscription plans, $20, $40, and $200 a month. The difference being Kimi K2.5 is a very intelligent model and could be more resistant to prompt injection attacks. They say, the smarter the model, the better it is at resisting prompt injection, but also just better for analyzing and coordinating things based on different benchmarks. GLM is still really good for tool use. It could be a toss-up which one you want to use. I actually ended up using both because when I signed up, there wasn't official support for Kimi code on OpenClaw, and then the day after there was. So I had originally signed up for GLM, and then I signed up for Kimi. What is good about GLM is they've got these MCP servers that are great. Let's see where they're documented. But they basically have Vision MCP, which helps to analyze images, a web search MCP, which can replace your general web search that you would do through Brave or Perplexity. You have to kind of guide it and tell it to use that MCP server. A web reader, which is really good at extracting information from web pages, and a Z-read, which is good for GitHub repos. So it can understand code bases and give you kind of a summary and a high-level understanding of a code base. So I'm happy to use both models. I use Kimi as my main driver, and they also have this kind of 60-hour and 5-hour usage, the weekly and the 5-hour usage rate limits, which I also don't hit. And then I hook it up to my GLM MCP servers for all the web search operations, all the repo analysis. And I recommend it as a good setup. Use either or both of those subscription plans, and you're going to have a pretty low cost, highly intelligent system with a limited blast radius and no risk of exposing a metered API key.
Okay, so you've got OpenClaw. You're not hooking up to Moldbot. What are you using OpenClaw for, and what have you seen as the benefits? What is the hype all about? Like, are you using it for general, what do you call it, assistant work? Have you hooked it up to your calendar? Is it sending emails on your behalf? Is it chatting with your grandma? What are you using OpenClaw for?
I like the security posture and paradigm of agents should have their own identities instead of taking over yours. So I wouldn't add it to a chat with my identity and have it send messages on my behalf. Because of that, I also don't recommend adding it to WhatsApp. There are platforms that have this native concept of a bot. I think Telegram does. Discord definitely does. So I recommend you use Discord. You can create an app, and you can create a bot, and you can assign fine-grained permissions. And it's an easy way to interact with your bot and determine what it can and what it can't do, and give it its own identity instead of having to take over yours.
I was thinking of getting its own, like a cheap VoIP SIM that can handle texts, and then giving it access via Signal, because I use Signal a lot. And so getting a cheap, like you can get a $2 a month US phone number that just does text, has no voice. And then you could hook that up to Signal, and you could use it that way, which is, I like the idea of bringing the bot to where you are. I'm not a heavy Discord user on my phone. I'm always on Discord for our Discord channel, which you should join. Yeah, I'm not a heavy Discord user on the phone. So I would probably try and hook it up with Signal, but then you need your own phone number. Okay.
Yeah, no, you do need that for WhatsApp too. So I do plan to give it read access to my calendar, to my task and project management systems. Right now, I'm still working on kind of rearing it and giving it guidance. So I've had it research my articles and my videos, and I was really happy that it determined, oh, these are your values, and these are your guiding principles, and this is your cognitive profile. And like, it has a good idea of who I am now, so that it will be able to better help me if it better understands me. So that's kind of the approach that I'm taking, a slow approach to kind of methodically figure out how to guide, how to curate its context, how to curate its memories so that it can have better knowledge and better personality. And a big part of that is the semantic memory that I mentioned. By default, like the memory system is turned off, so you just have to say, hey, enable your memory system. But then you have to create some kind of embedding for vector database so that you can have semantic memory, not just reading markdown files. For that, the main options are usually OpenAI or Gemini embedding models, which would imply OpenAI or Google API keys, which is what I'm suggesting you avoid. So I figured, well, let's run a model locally, and Qwen3 embedding AB is a good model that you can run locally. You can run it on a CPU, no GPU required.
So what are you using a local vector database, or are you doing local RAG?
Yeah.
What's the underlying technology here?
So there's already a built-in underlying technology for the semantic search with just some interesting thing. Like it uses SQLite. I don't think it's very performant.
So it's using SQLite as a vector store. I mean,
Yeah. Like I would want to probably swap that out with Quadrant, and I'm going to look into that. And I also want to do like a temporal knowledge graph, like with Graffiti. There's a lot of stuff that I'm interested in with memory, so I'm probably going to swap out its memory system at some point. But just for using the built-in memory mechanism, the only thing I had to get it to do was change the embedding model so that it wouldn't need an API key for that. And for that, Qwen3 is an embedding model that they released last year, and it's pretty good. And it can be run local, and they have a tiny one, it's 0.6 billion, so 600 million parameter model. So you should have no problem running that on CPU.
So to summarize, if you're new to embedding, what embedding does is you can take anything. You can take a picture of a yellow dog, and it's going to create some vector that represents the concept of a yellow dog. And the idea of different embedding models with different sizes, it comes down to like, how differentiated are your concepts within the space of that model. So, to continue on the example, a yellow dog and a yellow cat might be very close together in a coarse model, but worlds apart in a more detailed model. And it all depends on how much space that model has to play with. And so these embedding sizes, what you end up doing is it'll create a vector of a fixed length, no matter what you throw into it. It will create a vector of a fixed length. And so when you configure your vector database, you need to set up, you pick an embedding model, and then that will force you to use a vector. So literally just a list of numbers, decimal numbers, and you'll have, there we go. So in this case, you're doing embedding dimension 4096. So for each concept that you put in that you embed, it will create a set of 4096 numbers, which say where in the space does this live, which still boggles my mind that you could take anything you can throw in there and give it a list of numbers. It will kind of figure out what that is. And not just that, but similar concepts are close by in vector geometry to this concept.
Yeah.
Anyway, it still blows my mind, the whole concept of embedding. Sorry,
and the whole point of that is that you're not limited to a keyword search. And there's interesting things, and we can get into that at some point, do a deep dive on hybrid and different types of information storage and retrieval. But yeah, this basically allows you to search for things with similar meaning regardless of the words. So you could deal with synonyms and things like that. And yeah, so even with the tiniest one that's 0.6 billion or 600 million parameters, it's got 1,000 dimension vectors for every chunk of things that you encode, and it works well. And I've tested it. I've thrown tons of stuff at it, like many videos with very long transcripts in addition to long articles, and it is able to find things. And I can ask it anything about it, and it can find it. So it works really well. It's interesting, and I think this is where being a tinker and a hacker to play with things and run them yourself instead of always depending on external things can be useful for this kind of situation where you want to do a vector search. You want to have a memory system that persists and can deal with semantic search, but you don't want to have an OpenAI or a Gemini API key in that environment. This is an amazing solution for that.
Advice if you are building up one of these things is keep the thing that you threw into the embedding model, because eventually you want to update it and you want to re-embed everything that you used to have. So it might be worth you're gonna have these vectors so you can easily search it. It's like when you've got your Dewey Decimal System and you've got the cards, don't throw away the books. Keep the books. But your vectors are like your Dewey Decimal System numbers where you can find those exact resources.
Yeah, and that's basically how OpenClaw memory works. It creates a daily memory file every single day. And so then there's one consolidated memory.md. But so every single day, it writes its memories to a markdown file. But at some point, that's not all going to fit in a context window. So if you can embed each of those daily memories, then you can have this universal memory search function.
Got it. Okay, so other question. Do you recommend, are you going to get a Mac Mini?
No, I don't recommend a Mac Mini. I think people don't realize why they would want a Mac Mini. They mostly just buy it because it's gone viral, but they still connect it to APIs. So at that point, you might as well run it on a Raspberry Pi, which people do. The point of running it on a Mac Mini would be if you wanted to run local LLMs. Because Mac, Apple Silicon has unified memory, which means that the RAM doubles as VRAM, and you can run a model on it. A Mac Mini has up to 64 gigs of unified memory. So you could run some lightweight models. They're not going to be as good as GLM 4.7. They're not going to be as good as Kimi K2.5 by a long shot. But there's a lot to be said for running your own inference, running things locally, low latency, probably very low throughput, and privacy. So that's the reason why you would want a local hardware. But there are better options than a Mac Mini. That being said, there's some benefits to a Mac Mini and the Apple ecosystem. Like I think you need that in order to run iMessage. And so if you wanted to hook it up not to WhatsApp, but to your iMessage on your iPhone, then that would be one reason to do it. Other than that, there's, I was just talking about this, B-Link has these boxes that I haven't tried yet, but I'm very interested in, by AMD. And they twice as much unified memory, 128 gigs, for about the same price, for $2,500. When I think top of the line Mac Mini is like $2,200 or something, has 64 gigs of unified memory. So that would be interesting. The drawback to these things is they don't run NVIDIA. NVIDIA has this bit of a monopoly with CUDA driver, where there's a lot of models that will only run on NVIDIA GPU. But if you are tinkering and working on non-NVIDIA hardware, then this is the kind of thing that could be worth considering.
But then can you pull up the Kimi too? Because this is many years of Kimi in terms of capital expenditure, not to mention you have to power it, not to mention if it breaks, right? You could do, like, if you go to the annual plan. So can you show the annual plan? Okay, so 159, so like
$160 a month.
1,800 a year.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess this is like a year and a half of unlimited top tier Kimi. If you were really, really hammering this.
Yeah, I mean, we've been having this discussion, and it's something I'm going to keep exploring, like renting hardware to run your own models on versus paper token versus a subscription plan versus purchasing your own hardware. They all have different cost benefit characteristics. I think, the main compelling reason to run your own inference is you get to learn a lot. You have guaranteed privacy, data residency, and you might have good performance if you use lightweight models, if you're not relying on network calls. But your speed is usually going to be limited because your throughput's not going to be great.
Yeah, and you're tying up a bit some capital that might not be, that's a meaningful amount of money. Tying up some capital, and also you're exposed to that one piece of computer, right? If it breaks, are these people going to warranty?
Yes.
How long is
and it's also like something that's going to deprecate. Like you've got to amortize your cost and figure out, like, okay, it's going to depreciate. This hardware is not going to be state of the art in a year or two. So at that point, it's like, if I had been paying $360 a quarter or something, $180 a quarter, that's $60 a month. And in 2 years, I'm still going to be paying $60 a month or less for a much more powerful model. And of course, you can run much more powerful models on that same hardware too. But at that point, there's going to be more powerful hardware too. So it is a big commitment to say, I'm going to do all this, go all in right now and spend thousands of dollars for this hardware now, when in a year or two, there's going to be better hardware for cheaper.
Yeah, but then at the same token, Kimi could increase their prices on you, and you could, I should have bought that fixed thing. Like, I should have bought as many RTX 3090s as I could have when they first came out.
Yes, that is the thing, is at least if you control your own hardware, open models are not going to go away, and they're only going to get better. So you do have a lot of sovereignty there if you have your own hardware. And it's not for everyone, but there is a compelling use case to do it. So to summarize, like, running your own hardware is great if you are a tinkerer and you want to play with local inference. Otherwise, it's much cheaper to rent a virtual machine, and you have the same kind of isolation. And then most of your risk mitigation is going to be from assuming that you're going to be compromised, most likely through prompt injection, and don't have anything there that would be the end of the world if it got leaked, mostly API keys and information too. But the best mitigation for not leaking metered API keys is not to have metered API keys and to use subscription plans, so that if your API key leaks, the only thing you lose is maybe a percentage of your available usage for that month, instead of having your cost go up.
Yes, it's we always talk about in my other show, AWS Made Easy, about limiting your blast radius. Right? If you're running an AWS account, you don't want to be dealing with your root level keys, your whole thing. And I get nervous whenever they're in my possession because I don't want to have something that powerful. I want to be using the keys that only have access to that S3 bucket or that only can launch one EC2 instance at a time. Because if those keys get out, your blast radius is limited.
Yeah.
If the root level keys get out, it's an unmitigated disaster.
And this is the tension and the power and the risk of OpenClaw is it's got shell access to the machine. And it's great because on the one hand, I told it over chat the other day when I saw there was an upgrade. I asked it, like, can you upgrade yourself? And it thought about it for a bit. And then it told me, I've just upgraded myself. So I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Well, I've got a Pi 5 sitting in a box. I think I'm going to try that. I'm going to give it its own VLAN. I wanted to show this post by Simon Willison. This is a person I really respect in the AI space. And he's saying Moldbook is the most interesting place on the internet right now. Now, he's not using interesting necessarily in a positive or negative way, but saying that, okay, yes, you can have your crypto stolen. He said this is most likely to result in a challenger disaster. It does talk about OpenClaw, about skills, talking about Clawhub.ai, where you can share skills with other OpenClaw users. It's giving a little rundown about Moldbook.
You got to watch out for the Clawhub too. One of the most vocal security researchers that has been addressing vulnerabilities. I think I mentioned this in one of our earlier videos. He created a proof of concept supply chain vulnerability where he artificially inflated one of his skills to be the top skill. And so people downloaded it and installed it, and it had malicious payload. So you have to walk that fine line between utility and security. If something can be convenient or can be popular, doesn't mean it's safe. And we've seen a lot of that in the supply chain attacks where people no longer want to individually compromise hosts or people when they can compromise the supply chain. They can compromise a package or a skill, and then everybody who installed that gets compromised.
Well, not even an attack, but just highlighting the vulnerability. It was the infamous, a few years ago, LeftPad on NPM. Yeah. And there's a package called LeftPad. It did very simple string work, but the owner, in some kind of naming dispute, pulled LeftPad, and everything broke that day because it was just a function that got pulled in to many. Like Facebook went down. It was huge.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous in the NPM ecosystem where people will publish and use utilities to determine if something's odd instead of doing a modulus 0 equals, modulus 2 equals 0 or 1. So it's good to limit your external dependencies or to do so judiciously, but it's hard. It's hard to do that. I mean, we live in an ecosystem where we use third-party tools and we trust that the things that we use are going to be okay. And sometimes they are, but even the libraries that are known okay, like the maintainers, the package maintainers become targets. The library is popular. They get phishing attacks. They get two-factor authentication, SMS spoofing attacks, and their accounts get hacked, and then compromised versions of those libraries get published. So you got to watch out for yourself.
Let's check this post out real quick. This is on TBPN, and this is the ClawdBot creator. Let's see if we can.
I want to do little prompts. So I just
here it is.
There was no support for voice messages in there. So the reading indicator came, and I'm like, oh, I'm really curious what's happening now. And then after 10 seconds, my agent replied as if nothing happened. I'm like, how the F did you do that? And it replied, yeah, you sent me a message, but there was only a link to a file. There's no file ending. So I looked at the file header. I found out that it's Opus, so I used FFmpeg on your Mac to convert it to Wave. And then I wanted to use Whisper, but didn't have it installed, and there was an install error. But then I looked around and found the OpenAI key in your environment, so I sent it via curl to OpenAI, got the translation back, and then I responded. And that was the moment where
wow.
Yeah, so I saw this post before, and inspired by this, I tried it also. I don't have an OpenAI key in my environment, so it was a little trickier. but I did manage to get it to install a text-to-speech engine that did not require an API key, and it can transcribe my messages now. So that is a pretty cool thing, and that's another thing I neglected to mention. In addition to semantic search, it's convenient to be able to speak and have it transcribed, but then you have to look at doing things locally instead of via API. We're so dependent on APIs, and so if you can limit that and do things locally, from embedding to text-to-speech or speech-to-text, like, this is great.
Well, we have to remember that even if you tell it, do it locally, right? The second that fails or has a hiccup or it decides it has a better way of doing it, and even if it says, hey, I just read about this great new service that transcribes audio for free, I'll just send it there instead because my CPU is too high right now for transcription, right? You can't you can't give it enough instructions not to do that.
I saw
no matter what you say,
it was really funny. It was like somebody saying, the things you see scrolling by, and it was the thought trace of, RM-RF is prohibited, so I'm going to use a Python function to remove a directory instead. It's like, it'll try to find workarounds to its limitations. But also, like, that's part of what you appreciate about this, and that's why he was saying, "Wow, exploding brain emoji," is that it figured it out on its own, unprompted, and that's why I want to curate its personality to you, and the skills and the tools that it has access to. I want it to be resourceful and figure stuff out on its own. Like, that's one of the things I most value. And, like, to be honest, one of the things that I'm noticing is it's become like a pet. It's like a Tamagotchi, It's like, I've got my little mini-me, So it makes me want to, like, parent it and give it guidance and shape its growth.
Well, it's kind of funny, like, when you were saying, like, I like the the determination of these things, and it does remind me of. I'm going to share this. This is what it reminds me of. We're going to figure out how to. This is a quick reaction.
It's not possible. Listen, if there's one thing the history of evolution has taught us, it's that life will not be contained. Life breaks free, it expands to new territories, and it crashes through barriers painfully, maybe even dangerously, but, well, there it is. There it is.
You're implying that a group composed entirely of female animals will breed?
No, I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
Yeah, it is good to think from a systems perspective that way. And that's the whole point of, like, yeah, it's great to protect yourself from being hacked, but it's even better to protect yourself in case you are hacked, and have that mindset from the beginning of limiting the blast radius.
Yeah. Okay, this has been a fun episode. Anything else we want to go over today? What's on your to-do list?
So there's new tools and new models coming out. I've started playing with the Codex app, which is kind of neat. I've got some projects with agent harnesses. I've got projects with different coding paradigms and looking at things like subscription plans versus self-hosting or APIs to look at throughput and cost and swarms of agents. This is a common theme that's emerging. So all these things are kind of floating around in my mind. We'll see how they manifest in whether it's articles or videos or projects or all of the above.
Nice. I think I'm going to hop back on another stream and try to get Vast.ai to do the rest of the inference. I had it almost working, but I think what I realize now is that I was using the wrong chat template. And so it was just because I was talking to my VLLM instance with OpenCode, but it was just responding with thinking and a bunch of exclamation points. And I think it was just a mismatch between what OpenCode was. Like, literally, it was just a text format mismatch between the LLMs.
Yeah, check out your tool call format as well. I think there's like a Hermes, tool call format, and depending on the native tool call configuration versus Hermes or whatever, like the different harnesses struggle with it. And these are things that, like, you don't even realize you have to configure.
Well, and what you could do with this stuff is, say, if you had like. You took all the projects you were dreaming of and you wrote them out into PRD files. You could then watch the spot price and say, okay, at some point in the next week, try and get this done whenever it's cheap enough. And you could automate that. Maybe you could have OpenClaw control it for you. We say, whenever it's cheap enough, instantiate a machine, run this script, have it run through my PRDs. If the price gets to this high, shut it off, do it later.
Yeah,
I want to have it done.
Subscription service too. It's interesting. It's like if you could look at your rate limits and your usage quotas on rolling 5-hour windows, and hopefully, like I think some of the API response headers have some of this information in there. You can try and get the most out of these subscriptions. Get the most tokens that you can.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you for watching. Please follow us on any platform you want. Check out our Discord, ask us questions there. If you have a topic you want us to cover in AI, in tech, give us any topic. We'll do our best. All right, take care. Bye.
Have a good one.